a short story with some adult themes. There are juicy consequences as the land sprouts in amorous fits of green swelter when at last it rains. The deep-rooted sedge finally breaks through the claypan, and the spotted myrtle sends down invasive feelers amongst the long-lost understory of moving sediment. The sandy loams go squishy, the feldspar curdles. Erosion gullies open up where there used to be well-whacked wallaby tracks. Mostly it all goes unseen, churning in draughts below the expressionless folds of wide surface, seeping among the rocks, as cheesy as a rotting sponge. The wildflowers rejoice and the clover dances, certainly, but in the compact subsoil there are corrosive processes involving limestone and the chemistry of depleted seabeds. The sky, of course, very rarely opens. There are whole seasons of nasty sunshine. Yet when it rains, it pisses down and shames the whining farmer. This is what happened in the year of sudden ferment. The entire district was aching for a horny sky god, and when finally the clouds did gather, everyone complained of damp undertakings. There was a month's rain one Tuesday. Then, as if nothing had become of it, the heavens went back to blue. This tide was soon forgotten though, especially for Ricky Sturgeon, whose plumbing franchise enabled him to enjoy the flash mercy of corporeal ways. He was immersed, right then, in a young lady named Hannah Rickenback. She herself was an escapee, brunettish and double-breasted, from a tedious romance in the insipid wastes of far-off Yarrawonga. The jilted local was a caravan salesman with unmanly habits. Ricky's van was parked in the driveway. The building, a red cedar kit home with numerous frills, perched on a flat spectacle of overhang in order to get a beautiful view of the long, straight irrigation channels. There was a stand of golden wattle nearby as well. There was a swimming pool, and to one side, bubbling and steamy, the Spa of Norway. Within, there was an open-plan boudoir, especially equipped with inbuilt glitz and lava lamps and a vibrating divan. It was inconspicuous from all the approaches. It was a quiet, rural retreat where a plumber could find his illustrious diversions. He'd invested in a throbbing pink lounge rug and piped loops of Tony Bennett's greatest hits into the bathroom with the bright aqua tiles. The nearest neighbours were a mile away in case the moaning became animal noises, all the way until raucous 3 a.m. Romp and dally, that was the meaning of Sturgeon's fair abode. He built it from the money he had made installing ball cocks for unhappy housewives. It was somewhere he could wave his plumb bob and inspect wet vents and dribbling overflows. Hannah Rickenback was his latest conquest. His fellow plumbers couldn't work it out. He had creamy blue eyes and looked a bit like Tyrone Power in Witness for the Prosecution. But he was otherwise a scrawny tradesman with the personality of a septic tank. It was for reasons unexplained that the ladies found him fitting. The idea came to him several years beforehand. There he was, taking Carol O'Farrell, a sheep farmer's daughter, on the tailgate of his trade van, when some prim pedestrians wandered by and shouted out, "Why don't you get a room?" It was a reasonable request. Out on the highway there were blocks for sale amidst the funny-shaped new subdivisions. There were a few hobby farmers growing kiwi fruit and marijuana, but the great measure of the sweeping paddocks remained unfulfilled. It was a 20-minute drive, remote enough to be naughty, The kit home came in a box with instructions in Taiwanese and necessitated 3 barbecues of working bees to call it completely assembled. It was constructed around the king-size bed of Posturepedic pretensions, with hefty ottomans either side and fastening clips for the handcuffs on the railing. There was mood lighting and mirrors on the ceiling looking down with explicit precision. "It sure looks fully equipped," observed his friend young Munro, a turner and fitter's apprentice. "A man needs a shed," said Sturgeon, being modest. Munro walked around, boggling at the prospects. He knew Ricky. He knew he'd soon be doing Swedish things in that spar of Norway. "This is something more than a shed, mate," Munro estimated. "Check this out," said the Sturgeon. He pressed a button and a wall panel opened, revealing a wine rack lit with spinning silver strobe. It was the epitome of suave. Fine mists of pheromones filled the perfumed air. "Babes just can't resist," he observed, and polished his rough knuckles on the velvet like a master. Young Munro had no luck with babes at all. He was, frustratingly, pimply and shy of loveliness. "I don't know how you do it, Ricky," he confessed, and shook his head, impressed. It was, it turned out, a long road. Matters became sticky when Sturgeon dropped his plans into the local shire. The Lord Mayor, of all people, was the first to lodge a written objection in the strongest possible terms. Ostensibly, this was to do with parking regulations and the bylaws governing turning circles and easements. But in fact, as everyone understood, it concerned something more of his merry wife Nicole. Sturgeon Plumbing had that April installed a new elbow in her laundry, and Ricky Sturgeon never sent her a bill. Then Councillor Norris raised an objection. Red cedar didn't meet the fire specifications. But in fact, Sturgeon Plumbing had fixed the drains of his wife Betty with a plunger, and the whole town said it was a metaphor. "Plunger," people said with rollicking winks. Likewise, Councillor Mason, concerned, he said, about a heritage overlays, had a wife, Daphne, who rang a plumber every time she felt lonely. Councillor Muffley's wife, Nolene, popped a tube and needed a diaphragm installed in her U-bend, and Ricky turned up like a hero with a wrench and did it for a favour. The councillor objected that the proposed dwelling marred the character of the landscape and made ecological appraisals on a flimsy pretext. Sturgeon had to take the whole project to appeal. "For unaccountable notions," spake the magistrate, uninvolved, "every councillor in the district has made up spurious obstructions, when all this poor plumber wants to do is build a simple getaway and watch the seasons from his front veranda. I can't see the problem." "What bollocks," whispered the Lord Mayor in attendance at the hearing. "A simple getaway, my hairy foot," cursed Councillor Muffley, sitting with him. "Simple getaways don't sport fold-out massage tables and a spanking restraint," he observed astutely. "A den of iniquity, more like it," Councillor Norris, who was with them as well, whispered, and said he feared, as a godly man, that it might become a cat house. "Overruled," declared the magistrate, and the planning permit went ahead. So did Sturgeon's love life. He might have had the personality of a septic tank and a scrawniness notwithstanding, but from a woman's point of view he had biceps, a handful of shifting spanners, and the smile of a tradesman's dazzle. Pretty soon the highway out of town was replete with discreet visitations. Lisa Bollingsworth was an important woman thereabouts. She was on the Christmas committee and ran the hospital raffle. There was the chance, some people suggested, that she might make a good MLC for the statewide country party. One day she had a hairball in her grease trap, an embarrassing complaint. Sturgeon ventured forth. That evening she was seen driving to his love nest with a quiver of smitten yearning in her voice. For several weeks she went all funny and giggled at inappropriate moments. Miss Julianne Harris was another case. She rang up about her guttering. Her husband was a bookie and was often chasing better odds in New South Wales. Sturgeon gave her a reasonable quotation. She noticed he had biceps and was seen traversing the lonesome highway directly to his lair, fidgety, winsome. What Mr. Harris didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Ricky would be sitting back, relaxing on the aforementioned veranda, when up the driveway drives plain Thelma McAgney, pretending to have a dripping faucet keeping her awake. "Beds of roses," grinned the Sturgeon, getting upwards, and he had thought it would be a quiet night. Plain Thelma came in nervously and made silly excuses, and then fell pathetic into his plumber's arms like a schoolgirl groupie falling for a famous drummer. Then there was the woman from the fish and chip array, and the lady from the checkout, and the woman on the telephone desk at the auto repairs. There was Jill of the Tremors and Millie Pillows and Stephanie Cardswell, who played the organ at St. Angelina's. There was Nola, just Nola, who deliberately broke her kitchen tap and rang up and said it was an emergency. Sturgeon got to frolic. There were women whose plumbing needed attention right along the river towns. In some instances, it wasn't even necessary to have an issue with your flow rate. When Hannah Rickenback came to town, she was walking by a street repair, and there was Sturgeon down a manhole amending a leaking main, while half a dozen other plumbers stood around just looking handsome. Ding! He had biceps, a handful of shifting spanners, and, looking up at ankle height as she sauntered past, the smile of the tradesman's dazzle. She wrote down the phone number emblazoned on his van. She rang up late into the evening. "I'm dealing with a pressure valve," she complained. "Is it urgent?" asked the plumber. "Terribly," she explained. "I can come out and look at it," he offered. "No need," she said. "I'll bring it to you." That's how urgent it was. She drove the 20 minutes with the tingles, and when she knocked on his red cedar door, said she had forgotten to bring the pressure valve, but her pipes were bursting for some love, double entendres by the dozen. "I could apply my flange," suggested the plumber. "You can siphon my overflow any time," said Hannah, blushing. "Service pipe," said the plumber. "Flappers," said Hannah. "Suction," said the plumber. "Pump," said Hannah. "Cock," said he. "A faucet or valve for regulating water flow." "Nipple," said she. "A short length of pipe installed between couplings or other fittings." "There's a male end and a female end. Johnny bolts and joy runners, J-bends, jackets and junctions." Hannah was flushed with grip. She was going to blow her boiler. Sturgeon had set it up so that all he had to do was clap his hands, and the mood lighting went into shadowy seductions. Bert Bacharach started singing, "Make it easy on yourself." Passion may be measured in cubic feet per minute. When a plumber puts his spigot to the hub, there's a zone of saturation. All the pipework in the house heats up. It was no evening for air bubbles. It was time for impellers and ejectors and butterfly valves and head. Hannah threw herself on his king-sized layabout with posturpedic pretensions and inhaled the pheromones, so long to caravan salesmen with unmanly habits in faraway Yarrawonga. In the darkness outside, the starry dingle did its rural twinkle. The weather was clear and still. There wasn't a single cloud in the long stretch of the Australian horizons. Wallabies were whacking new paths across the broad hospitality. The irrigation channel flowed relentless, a dark line of wet salvation for farmers of barley and triticale. Among the hobby farms, Retired sociologists sat below the dingle and smoked like stoners, dreaming of the mellow range of sweet existence. It was, on the whole, a nightly idyll. Bunnies humping in their burrows, the vast universe spinning in untidy patterns for a thrill. It was a very private stretch of road. Other than the road trains carting lambs to market in the spring, it was bereft of commerce, and after sundown barely showed a stray sedan. Sturgeon valued isolation. There was no need for any signage saying, "Do not disturb." You could see the dim glow of town lights in the distance, yet otherwise they were all alone for all the world and focused on the sudden merit of their athletic tantra. He knew his moves. He'd been down a drain or two. He knew what spanners loosen up a U-bolt. Alone, the ruffled majesty of a great big night, the wide tangle of human pipings clasping at mutual affirmations. They could be as Swedish as they like in the spa of Norway. The sheer clemency of the atmosphere imbibed a false security, however. This was the point of detailing the distant rains. The sky squats over the valley. The creek beds might go dry again after that flush Tuesday, but underneath, in the chemistry of calcium, roots do their rooting to the hilt. As we began by saying, Ricky's van was parked in the driveway, and he himself was immersed, right then, in Hannah Rickenback. They'd reached the stage of playing Tarzan and Jane. A jungle doesn't need a plumber. It needs a wild man with biceps true who can yodel as he swings along the rafters. Jane dangled. Tarzan went bam. It was so successful, he did it again. Bam, bam, bam. The whole red cedar kit home shook and juddered. The lava in his lamps did wobble, pounding primalism. Appreciative, Hannah Rickenback was cushioned to his wallop. The only limitation was the force in his loins. Tyrone Powers, in witness for the prosecution, never got his hair mussed in a thundering romp of nature quite the same. "Tarzan me," Hannah begged, using it as a verb. Tarzan named his thrusts all Jane. "Jane, Jane, Jane." He was calling in a sweat. Oh, the soft pink wash closet of woman. It must have been at the point of climax, it is reckoned, that geology intervened. Who knows what thudding promise sent them shiny with mixed perspiration. Tarzan swung upon his rope. Jane kissed civilization goodbye. Pressure valve. It popped. Together they blew a mighty gusher. The hose bib went frantic. The head tank of accumulated tension sprung a bust. The only ones who heard Tarzan yodel and Jane call out for a sugar syrup full of mercy were the wallabies, very wisely hopping up to higher ground. Free-flowing waves of adult jubilation. Jane, 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 and Jane again. It must have been one Jane too many. With a groan of red cedar friction, the infrastructure grew unsettled. The earth moved. A giant sinkhole then opened up, and in a feeding frenzy swallowed Sturgeon's love nest whole in what was a sudden gulp. Ricky's van moved to the precipice. It wasn't quite devoured by the melting clays. Therein was the irony. The plumber, neglectful of his own design, had left a downpipe running underneath the bold foundations, and when Tuesday rained as though the sky was one huge cistern of overflowing wanton, waters had washed aside the bitter sands, and the roots of golden mottles had done the rest. The widespread thighs of the motherland. The kit home folded. The clay gave way. The great bed of conquest, the open-plan boudoir and all, buckled up and fell into the gaping pit. For Ricky, It seemed as though he'd banged a vortex underneath him. Oh, plumb bob of deep dimensions. It was over in 30 seconds. The waters had gouged a sump of bottomless paradox, and the kit home packed up its finery and fantasy themes and fell into the dark tunnels of tragic love. If they screamed going down, no one heard them, except the wallabies and the cold stars jiggling in Orion. Young Munro found a sinkhole in the morning. He wondered why Ricky didn't answer his phone. There was no sign of Ricky or the owner of the second car, a lady-shaped Corolla bearing Yarrawonga licence plates, strangely out of place. When the rescue teams arrived, a geologist from the Department of Lands declined to say how deep it was, but said he couldn't see the bottom. "The sandy loams go squishy," he said, going scientific. "The feldspar curdles. It's in the weeks after heavy rains that the grim earth decides to eat the modest getaways of working men." He explained that there are stratifications, and once one layer is washed away, it only takes some rough vibration to make the entire shebang collapse. "Poor Ricky," saith young Munro, "and whoever shared those rough vibrations." Thus the end of a Babe Lair unsurpassed. The weather behaved after that. Rains became steady. The sunshine wasn't quite as nasty as before. Men on long ropes couldn't find a condom. Inevitably, there were some comparisons of mythic resonance, led once more by Councillor Norris, who, as a godly man, felt assured they had seen a case of deserving wickedness. The husbands of the river towns sighed with relief. At the funeral service, however, where poor Hannah Rickenback never got a mention, there were 350 wailing women, all lamenting their loss. There was a photo of the scrawny plumber on the altar. He didn't look like a virile wonder much at all, but the wives of police chiefs, senators and senior bureaucrats sobbed like little girls stripped of candy. Sturgeon's workmates gathered as a guard of honour. "I don't know how he did it," marvelled young Munro, nodding to the thronging females clad in black and in tearful vulnerability. He determined, though, that as an apprentice it was time to plumb his deep fancy, now the master tradesman had gone, and despite his acne and his timid disposition, pick up lovely ladies who might be interested in what it is fitters and turners do.